The HOA president actually sent me a cease and desist letter for planting roses in my own backyard memorial garden, a garden I'd been tending for 3 years in memory of my late wife. Picture this. I'm kneeling in the dirt at dawn, placing Sarah's favorite yellow roses around the stone bench I'd carved with her initials, when the mailman delivers what looked like a legal bomb wrapped in expensive letterhead. The letter, signed by HOA President Linda Blackwood in her trademark purple ink, demanded immediate removal of non-approved landscaping elements and threatened daily fines of $200 until I achieved architectural compliance. I'm standing there with soil under my fingernails, staring at this piece of legal harassment while my wife's memorial roses swayed in the morning breeze like they were trying to comfort me. Ma'am, these are flowers planted in memory of my deceased wife. What would you do if someone tried to control how you honored your loved ones? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet you've got your own stories about HOA tyrants overstepping their bounds. Little did Linda know I'd spent 18 years as a city planning director. Big mistake attacking someone who knows municipal law better than most lawyers. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this nightmare. My name's Marcus, and 2 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah to a sudden heart attack. We'd been married 19 years, and losing her felt like someone had ripped the foundation out from under my entire existence. The grief was overwhelming. You know that suffocating feeling where every breath hurts and the world seems colorless without them. So I did what any devastated widower would do. I bought a house where we could start fresh memories together, except now I was creating them alone. Well, not exactly alone. I found a beautiful 2-acre property in suburban Georgia, complete with mature oak trees and rolling hills that reminded me of the countryside where Sarah and I had our first date. The previous owner had been a master gardener who'd created raised beds and walking paths that Sarah would have absolutely loved. I could almost hear her voice planning where we'd put the herb garden and maybe a small greenhouse. Picture this place, morning sunlight filtering through century-old oaks, creating patterns of light and shadow across emerald grass that stayed green year-round. Cardinals and blue jays called from the branches while honeysuckle climbed the old stone wall that bordered the back of the property. I'd sit on the wraparound porch with coffee in Sarah's favorite mug, the one with the faded butterfly that she'd bought at a craft fair in Asheville, watching deer emerge from the tree line to graze in the early morning mist. The silence was therapeutic. No urban chaos, no crushing reminders of the life we'd planned but never finished. Just the whisper of wind through leaves and the gentle sound of wind chimes Sarah had always wanted but we'd never gotten around to hanging. I'd spent 18 years as city planning director for Riverside County, navigating zoning disputes and reviewing development proposals. Back then, I'd learned that most bureaucratic harassment comes from people who don't understand the laws they're trying to enforce, knowledge that would prove invaluable when dealing with petty dictators like Linda. But after Sarah died, I took early retirement. The garden became my sanctuary, my therapy, my daily ritual of keeping her memory alive through something beautiful and growing. Then Linda Blackwood happened, like a tornado in designer suits demanding to speak to the manager of Mother Nature herself. In 2021, some corporate developer bought the farmland that surrounded 3 sides of my property. Before I knew it, bulldozers were scraping away wildflower meadows, and the sound of heavy machinery replaced my peaceful mornings. The smell of diesel exhaust and concrete dust began drifting across my property like an industrial plague, mixing with the honeysuckle scent until it smelled like a construction site had invaded paradise. Within 18 months, 52 identical colonial-style houses sprouted like plastic mushrooms after acid rain. Heritage Hills Estates, they called it, which was ironic considering they'd bulldozed all the actual heritage to build their suburban wasteland. But hey, nothing says heritage like paying $650,000 to live in a house that looks exactly like your neighbor's, right? Linda moved in from Connecticut driving a silver Lexus with vanity plates reading Boss One and an attitude that could freeze boiling water. She was everything you'd expect from a corporate refugee seeking suburban dominance. Perfectly highlighted auburn hair that never moved in the wind, designer handbags that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and that practiced smile that screams, "I've never met a rule I didn't want to weaponize." Within 4 months, she'd maneuvered herself into HOA president and started her crusade to civilize us backward southern folk. It began with friendly reconnaissance missions. She'd click across my gravel walkway in her power heels, which, let me tell you, sounds like a metronome having an anxiety attack, bringing store-bought cookies while commenting how my rustic property had such untapped potential. The overwhelming cloud of her perfume would clash with the natural jasmine blooming along my fence like cheap air freshener competing with actual flowers. When I politely declined her suggestion to modernize my landscaping with their approved plant list, her corporate smile turned calculating. That professional mask slipped just enough to reveal the control freak underneath. The harassment started subtly. Anonymous complaints to the county about my overgrown wildflower areas. I showed them my certified wildlife habitat designation from 2019, older than her entire subdivision. Then she claimed my bird feeders were attracting vermin that threatened property values. The animal control officer laughed and said my backyard looked like something from Southern Living magazine. But Linda had done her research. She'd discovered some obscure 1960s covenant about residential landscape uniformity, the kind of bureaucratic fossil that survives in subdivision documents like a legal virus. During my planning director days, I'd seen how these ancient restrictions could be weaponized against property owners who didn't know their rights. She convinced the Architectural Review Board, conveniently staffed by her new neighbors who owed their quick home sales to her real estate connections, to retroactively enforce community standards. Suddenly, my memorial garden that had existed peacefully for 3 years was now subject to Linda's approval. The woman who'd lived here for 6 months was trying to control how I grieved for my wife of 19 years. That's when she made her first tactical error. She attacked a grieving widower's tribute to his dead wife. Bad move, Linda. Really bad move. 3 weeks after the memorial garden cease and desist, Linda escalated with backup reinforcements. I was deadheading Sarah's roses in the early morning quiet when I heard the crunch of multiple vehicles on my gravel driveway. The scent of blooming gardenias mixed with something that reminded me of corporate desperation, that particular aroma of cheap cologne and power suits that follows middle management types everywhere. Linda stepped out of her Lexus wearing a triumphant expression, followed by a guy in an official-looking county uniform. His badge read, Tommy Patterson, Code Enforcement, and he carried an aluminum clipboard like it was a holy relic, and he was the chosen prophet of municipal harassment. Mr. Davidson, Linda announced with artificial sweetness, we've received multiple complaints about your unlicensed landscaping business. I nearly dropped my pruning shears. Landscaping business? Lady, I'm tending my wife's memorial garden. Tommy puffed out his chest and tapped his clipboard against his thigh, a nervous tick that would have been amusing if he wasn't trying to intimidate me. Sir, you're going to need to show me your commercial licensing for this horticultural operation, or I'll have to issue violations with fines of $300 per day until you achieve compliance. Now, I've dealt with enough corrupt inspectors during my planning director days to recognize when someone's running a shakedown. Tommy had that shifty demeanor of a parking meter attendant with delusions of grandeur, but I played along, pulling out my property deed and garden documentation. This is personal landscaping, I explained patiently, on my own property in memory of my deceased wife. Tommy barely glanced at the paperwork. Anonymous complaint says you're running an unlicensed business. Until you prove otherwise, all landscaping activities must cease immediately. That night, while Linda probably celebrated with wine that cost more than most people's car insurance, I fired up my old laptop. 18 years of city planning work had taught me that every bureaucrat leaves a digital footprint, and Tommy Patterson was about to get his examined under a very powerful microscope. First discovery: Tommy's code enforcement certification had expired 14 months ago. The man threatening me with daily fines wasn't even legally authorized to inspect a lemonade stand, let alone my property. I remembered a case from my planning days where a fake inspector had tried similar intimidation tactics. The secret was documenting everything before they realized they'd been exposed. I screenshot his expired credentials, filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board, and started digging deeper into his recent activities. A comprehensive search of public records revealed Tommy had been conducting fake inspections across 4 counties using his expired authorization. This wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence, it was systematic fraud. When the state board contacted Tommy about his unlicensed activities, he apparently panicked completely. Word travels fast in suburban counties, and I heard through my old planning department contacts that he'd called Linda in desperation, begging her to somehow fix this mess. Linda, being the strategic mastermind she believed herself to be, decided the best defense was aggressive offense. 5 days later, an official-looking invoice appeared in my mailbox. The Heritage Hills Estates, HOA, was now charging me a landscape maintenance surcharge of $400 per month for excessive botanical activities affecting community aesthetics. They'd backdated it to March. It was now August, so I supposedly owed $2,000. I had to admire the audacity. Linda was essentially charging me rent for growing flowers in memory of my wife on my own property. While Tommy faced a $15,000 fine and possible criminal charges for impersonating a government official, I was researching property rights precedents. Years ago, I'd studied a Supreme Court case called Nolan v. California Coastal Commission, where bureaucrats tried to force unreasonable conditions on a property owner. The court ruled that government can't impose arbitrary restrictions without legitimate public purpose. The principle was clear. They can't charge you fees for legal activities on your own property, especially activities protected by First Amendment memorial rights. Armed with this precedent, I filed a temporary restraining order in county court to stop Linda's extortion scheme. But I also hired a property surveyor to confirm my exact boundaries. Call it intuition from dealing with shady characters for nearly 2 decades. The survey results were like winning the lottery and finding a $20 bill in your old jacket on the same day. Linda's precious subdivision encroached 12 feet onto protected wetlands. 4 of the colonial houses, including one belonging to her sister Janet, were technically built on environmentally sensitive land without proper permits. I made a discreet call to the State Environmental Protection Agency. Sometimes the best revenge is simply following regulations while watching your enemies destroy themselves with their own violations. Within 10 days, 4 HOA houses received violation notices for illegal wetland construction. The potential penalties, $75,000 per structure plus mandatory remediation costs. Suddenly, Linda's measly $2,000 bill looked like pocket change compared to a potential $300,000 environmental disaster. The next morning, Linda stormed across my property line like Grant taking Richmond, except Grant probably had better manners and cleaner language. Her face was red enough to stop traffic, and she was screaming about harassment and property value destruction loud enough to scare every bird from my oak trees and probably wake the neighbors in the next subdivision. "You think you're clever," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me like she was casting a hex. "I'm going to sue you for intentional interference with business relationships." I calmly handed her the court papers for my restraining order hearing, still warm from the courthouse printer. "See you in court, Linda. Bring your checkbook and maybe a good environmental lawyer, because you're going to need both." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The sound of her heels retreating across gravel was sweeter than any birdsong I'd heard since Sarah died. Linda apparently learned nothing from Tommy's disgrace, because 3 weeks later she decided to escalate to media warfare. And by media warfare, I mean she called action News 5. I was watering Sarah's memorial roses in the golden hour light when I heard the rumble of a news van struggling up my gravel drive. The sound of heavy tires on stone has a distinct rhythm, like someone playing drums with bowling balls. Out stepped reporter Jennifer Walsh, followed by a camera operator who looked like he'd rather be covering literally anything else. Behind them, Linda emerged from her Lexus wearing what I can only describe as her concerned homeowner costume. Conservative navy blazer, understated makeup, and an expression suggesting she was bravely fighting back tears over the tragic destruction of suburban harmony. "Mr. Davidson," Jennifer called out, approaching with that practiced reporter walk, "we're here about allegations that your landscaping activities are negatively impacting community property values." I looked at Linda, who was positioning herself strategically in the background with 4 neighbors she'd apparently recruited as supporting actors. Their faces displayed the kind of manufactured concern you see in prescription drug commercials right before they list the side effects that include death. "Ma'am," I said, setting down my watering can, "I'm not sure what negative impacts you're referring to." The questions started coming rapidly. Was I aware of the community concerns? Did I care about neighborhood harmony? What about property values and resale potential? Linda had clearly coached Jennifer with loaded questions designed to make me look like some kind of suburban terrorist. But here's the thing about spending 18 years in city planning meetings. You learn to stay calm when people are trying to ambush you on camera. I invited the news crew to tour my memorial garden right there on the spot. The look on Linda's face when I knelt beside Sarah's rose bushes and explained the meaning behind each variety while maintaining direct eye contact with the camera was priceless. Like watching someone realize they'd brought a water pistol to a naval battle. This memorial garden has been professionally landscaped and maintained according to county horticultural standards, I explained calmly, pulling out a folder thick as a dictionary. The plants are all native species that support local wildlife. Would you like to see the environmental impact reports? I handed Jennifer copies of everything: professional landscaping certification showing expert design and maintenance, property tax records proving increased land value due to improvements, wildlife habitat designation from the county environmental office, and photographs documenting Linda's subdivision's wetland violations. You could practically watch the story pivot in real time. Jennifer's questions became sharper, more focused on why Linda would make claims that contradicted the physical evidence. Linda started sweating despite the October breeze carrying the scent of my blooming autumn clematis. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jennifer asked, turning the camera toward Linda, "do you have any documentation supporting your claims about property value impact?" Linda's response was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. She stammered about potential concerns and community standards, while her left eye developed a twitch I'd learned to recognize from countless planning board meetings with dishonest contractors. That's when I decided to share what I'd discovered about Linda's professional background. During my years reviewing development applications, I'd built a network of contacts across several states. A few strategic phone calls had revealed that Linda Blackwood wasn't exactly new to neighborhood warfare. "Jennifer," I said, "you might want to investigate Mrs. Blackwood's previous communities in Connecticut and Arizona. Interesting patterns emerge when you examine the public record trail. Linda went pale beneath her foundation makeup. She knew I'd done my research. The interview ended with Linda demanding equal airtime to present the HOA's side of the story. Jennifer agreed to a follow-up segment, which turned out to be Linda's second major tactical error. While I prepared for round 2 by gathering additional documentation, Linda apparently spent the week calling in political favors. The news station manager turned out to be Robert Chen, who'd worked with me on several transparency initiatives during my planning director tenure. Small world, especially when you've built a reputation for honest governance and exposing development fraud. The follow-up broadcast aired the following Tuesday. Jennifer Walsh presented a balanced investigative piece showing both properties, but Linda's performance was pure unintentional comedy. She contradicted herself multiple times, became defensive when asked basic questions, and accidentally admitted she'd never actually researched the environmental regulations she claimed to be protecting. Meanwhile, I provided calm, evidence-based responses supported by professional documentation. The visual contrast was striking, Linda looking increasingly frantic while I sat there with binders full of official records like some kind of municipal superhero. Community response was overwhelmingly positive. My voicemail filled with neighbors thanking me for standing up to Linda's authoritarian overreach. Several mentioned they'd been intimidated into silence before, worried about retaliation through architectural violations and harassment campaigns. But Linda wasn't finished. Humiliated by the media coverage and facing scrutiny about her track record, she decided to deploy nuclear options. The following Monday, I received a visit from the county health department. Linda had filed an emergency complaint claiming my excessive irrigation was creating standing water that bred mosquitoes, threatened public health, and violated sanitation ordinances. She demanded immediate cessation of all garden activities pending a comprehensive environmental health investigation. The health inspector, a competent professional named Maria who actually understood her job, arrived with proper credentials and legitimate authority. I welcomed her with complete transparency, even offering iced tea while she conducted her thorough inspection. When Maria discovered that my memorial garden used a state-of-the-art drip irrigation system with zero standing water and actually improved drainage compared to the original property conditions, her reaction wasn't what Linda had anticipated. "This is actually a model sustainable landscape design," she told me, taking photographs of the irrigation system. "Mind if I get your contractor's information? I know several property owners who'd love something like this." Linda's complaint was officially dismissed as frivolous and potentially malicious, language that would prove useful in future legal proceedings. The taste of victory was sweet, but I knew this was just the beginning of Linda's escalation campaign. If Linda had possessed any strategic intelligence, she would have retreated after the health department debacle. Instead, she doubled down like a desperate poker player with a mortgage payment due and a hand full of nothing but attitude. Friday afternoon, I was mulching around Sarah's memorial bench when I heard the familiar sound of a certified mail truck navigating my gravel driveway. The postal worker looked apologetic as he handed me a legal envelope thick enough to choke a draft horse. The return address made me smile. Morrison, Steinberg & Associates, Atlanta's most expensive corporate litigation firm. Linda had hired the kind of lawyers who charge $800 an hour to write threatening letters about neighborhood fence disputes. The cease and desist demanded I immediately halt all nuisance horticultural activities that allegedly violated noise ordinances through excessive lawn equipment usage during restricted hours. According to their creative legal interpretation, my morning garden maintenance created disruptive sounds that violated the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. They demanded $8,000 in mediation costs to avoid a comprehensive lawsuit. I had to admire the creativity. Linda was literally trying to fine me for using a watering can during daylight hours in my own backyard. The woman had elevated petty tyranny to an art form worthy of gallery exhibition, but the legal threat was just the opening salvo. Over the weekend, Linda organized what I can only describe as a surveillance operation. HOA members began driving past my property at walking speed, taking photographs and videos of every garden activity I performed. Someone started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my truck windshield about respecting community harmony and being a considerate neighbor. The county suddenly developed intense interest in my property. Building inspector Monday, fire marshal Tuesday, tax assessor Wednesday. Each visit was triggered by anonymous complaints about potential code violations. The aroma of bureaucratic harassment hung in the air heavier than morning fog over a swamp. During my planning director tenure, I'd witnessed this strategy before. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. The objective wasn't finding actual violations. It was exhausting me with constant harassment until I surrendered and relocated. Linda had apparently studied the handbook on destroying property owners through legal attrition warfare. But Linda had committed a critical strategic error. She'd picked a fight with someone who understood how to research public records and follow financial paper trails. That weekend, I spent 3 days in the basement archives of the county records office, a place that smells like old paper and broken bureaucratic dreams. What I discovered was better than finding buried treasure in my own backyard. Linda's subdivision had been constructed using emergency wetland permits that required 30-foot buffer zones from all natural water features. 5 houses, including Linda's own colonial mansion, had been built within the protected buffer zone. The violations carried potential fines of $15,000 per day, with possible demolition orders if environmental damage was deemed severe. But that wasn't the most damaging discovery. I also requested the HOA's complete financial records under Georgia's public disclosure laws, something any affected property owner can legally access. What I found made Tommy's fake inspector credentials look like a parking violation. Linda had been treating the HOA treasury like her personal expense account. No competitive bidding for maintenance contracts, despite state law requiring it for expenditures exceeding $15,000. Her brother-in-law Mike's lawn service held an exclusive $38,000 annual contract. Pool maintenance went to her nephew Danny for $22,000 yearly. The legal expense category included payments to her personal attorney for matters completely unrelated to HOA business. Years earlier, I'd worked on a case involving a city councilman who'd used identical self-dealing schemes. The key was documenting the pattern and proving deliberate intent to defraud. Linda had left a paper trail wider than Interstate 75. While I was building my legal case, Linda petitioned for a temporary restraining order against me. She claimed I was stalking and intimidating HOA members and had made threatening statements during our property dispute. The court hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, with sheriff's deputies serving papers while I was pruning Sarah's climbing roses in the evening twilight. I hired Catherine Morrison, an attorney specializing in HOA disputes who had a fearsome reputation for dismantling corrupt board members. Catherine reviewed my documentation and smiled, the kind of expression that makes opposing lawyers very nervous about their career choices. "Marcus," she said, spreading evidence across her conference table, "Linda's about to discover why you don't bring a plastic knife to a sword fight." The court hearing was pure legal theater. Linda arrived with 5 HOA members as witnesses, all wearing their Sunday finest and practicing their concerned citizen expressions. I brought a binder of evidence that could have served as a boat anchor. Judge Patricia Williams, a no-nonsense woman with 25 years of experience handling frivolous lawsuits, reviewed the materials with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant examining embezzlement evidence. Linda's witnesses contradicted each other under basic cross-examination, and my security camera footage clearly demonstrated who was conducting the actual harassment campaign. When Linda's attorney attempted to present evidence of my threatening behavior, Catherine produced audio recordings of every single interaction. Linda's voice on the recording sounded increasingly unhinged and desperate, while mine remained calm and professional throughout each encounter. Judge Williams dismissed Linda's restraining order petition and issued a protective order against Linda, commanding the HOA to cease surveillance and trespassing activities. She also awarded me $3,200 in attorney fees and warned Linda about potential perjury charges for making false statements under sworn testimony. Linda's meltdown in the courthouse parking lot became local news. She screamed at the judge about corrupt judicial systems and ranted about me destroying suburban civilization, loud enough to wake the dead in 4 counties. The newspaper reporter who witnessed her public breakdown wrote a front-page story titled HOA President's Courtroom. Tantrum exposes neighborhood tyranny. That evening, several subdivision residents approached me privately. They revealed Linda had been harassing numerous families, pool parties shut down for alleged noise violations, holiday decorations deemed architecturally inappropriate, parking citations for guests staying longer than 6 hours. Some residents were actively considering a recall petition to remove Linda from the board. But while I was savoring this small legal victory, Catherine had discovered something in the original HOA charter documents that would transform everything. Hidden in the dense legal language was a provision I'd completely overlooked, one that would permanently shift the balance of power. Any property owner within 500 feet of the subdivision could petition for associate membership as a voting participant. My Memorial Garden property not only qualified geographically, but as the largest single parcel by assessed value, I would control 28% of all voting decisions. Linda had been so obsessed with harassing me that she'd never realized I could simply join her little suburban kingdom and vote her into oblivion. The irony was absolutely delicious. In her desperate quest to control my property, Linda had handed me the keys to controlling hers. While Catherine was preparing our next legal strategy, she made a discovery that changed the entire game. She'd been reviewing the original subdivision development permits, those tedious technical documents that most people never bother examining, when she found something that made her call me at dawn. "Marcus, you need to come to my office immediately," she said, her voice containing the kind of excitement lawyers only experience when they discover smoking gun evidence. Linda's entire development is built on a foundation of lies, and it's about to collapse spectacularly. I drove to her office through early morning mist rising from the wetlands, the scent of damp earth mixing with anticipation. Catherine had fresh coffee brewing and documents spread across her conference table like a detective solving a murder mystery. The revelation was absolutely stunning. Linda's development violated the original county comprehensive plan in ways that could shut down the entire subdivision permanently. The area had been designated for low-density rural residential development, meaning a maximum of 20 homes on the 78-acre parcel. Linda's 52 colonial houses exceeded zoning density by over 260%. But here's where the story became fascinating. The developer had circumvented this restriction through something called an emergency housing variance. A loophole created after the 2019 tornado outbreak displaced thousands of families across Georgia. Emergency variances allowed temporary higher density development to address housing shortages. The crucial word was temporary. These emergency provisions expired after 4 years unless specifically renewed by the county commission. Linda's subdivision variance would expire on January 10th, just 8 weeks away. If the variance wasn't renewed, 32 houses would have to be demolished to meet original zoning requirements. The remaining 20 homeowners would face financial catastrophe. Catherine pulled up HOA financial projections on her computer. Current assessments are calculated assuming 52 paying units at $280 monthly, she explained. If 32 houses get demolished, the remaining residents would cover identical operating costs with only 20 units. The mathematics were brutal. Monthly assessments would jump from $280 to $728 per house. Most residents had no idea they were living in a financial time bomb set to explode in 2 months. But the real bombshell was what Catherine discovered in Linda's correspondence files obtained through our legal discovery process. Linda had known about the expiration date throughout her entire presidency. She'd been secretly lobbying county commissioners for renewal, but her harassment campaign against me had backfired spectacularly. During my planning director years, I'd worked directly with 3 current commission members on various development projects. They remembered me as the guy who always followed proper procedures and exposed financial irregularities before they became public scandals. Commissioner Rodriguez had specifically mentioned that honest planner with the Memorial Garden as an example of responsible rural development. Linda's public meltdowns and legal harassment had transformed potential allies into enemies. Her chances of getting the variance renewed were somewhere between non-existent and laughably impossible. Catherine then showed me the original HOA governing documents, focusing on a section that made my coffee taste like victory. The charter defined membership as all property owners within the community influence zone, which included a 500-foot buffer around the entire subdivision. My property fell within that buffer zone by 47 feet. As a pre-existing property owner with legal standing, I possessed the absolute right to join the HOA as a voting member. The charter specified that voting power was proportional to property size and assessed valuation. My 2-acre Memorial Garden property was assessed at $420,000, while the average subdivision home was assessed at $195,000. Under proportional voting rules, I would control 28% of all HOA decisions. If you join the HOA, Catherine explained, you can block any assessment increases, call special elections for board positions, access all financial records without legal battles, and propose charter amendments with your voting bloc. The irony was absolutely perfect. Linda had spent months attempting to control my property through HOA regulations. Now I could join her HOA and control her. But sitting there examining the legal documents, I realized something important. I didn't want to destroy this community. Many residents were victims of Linda's schemes, just like me. The real solution wasn't revenge, it was removing the cancer and healing the community. My objective shifted from payback to neighborhood restoration. Remove Linda, fix the financial corruption, create a sustainable HOA that actually served residents instead of feeding one person's power addiction. Linda, meanwhile, had somehow learned that information about the zoning expiration was leaking. She'd called an emergency HOA meeting for the upcoming Saturday, citing urgent financial matters requiring immediate member attention. The meeting notice was distributed with minimal advance warning, a classic suppression tactic designed to limit attendance from dissatisfied residents. I had 96 hours to file my HOA membership application and rally support from harassed neighbors. Saturday morning would become the final showdown for control of the community's future. Catherine worked through the weekend preparing legal documents while I contacted residents who'd approached me after the courthouse victory. The race was officially on, and the winner would control not just the HOA, but the financial survival of 52 families. The taste of justice was within reach. but it would require flawless execution and assistance from neighbors who were exhausted from living under Linda's reign of suburban terror. Saturday morning couldn't arrive fast enough, but I had 4 days to build a coalition capable of dismantling Linda's empire of petty tyranny. The aroma of fresh coffee and determination filled my kitchen as Catherine and I mapped our strategy like military generals planning a decisive campaign. First priority, recruit Sandra Chen, the retired librarian who lived on Dogwood Lane and had been documenting Linda's authoritarian overreach for 18 months. Sandra possessed that quiet strength you find in educators who've dealt with difficult board members and budget crises. Linda had fined her $150 for installing an unauthorized, little-free library. Apparently encouraging community reading violated the architectural covenant's vision of suburban conformity. When I called Sandra, her voice carried years of suppressed frustration. "Mr. Davidson, I've been waiting for someone to challenge that woman. How can I help?" Sandra's composition notebook contained 18 months of violations, fines, and intimidation incidents organized with a librarian's meticulous precision. She documented everything from Linda's surprise inspections to HOA board meetings where dissenting opinions were systematically silenced. Next was David Park, a certified public accountant who lived on Magnolia Court and had made the mistake of questioning HOA financial transparency. David was the kind of numbers professional who noticed when expenditures didn't match reality, a dangerous trait in Linda's world of creative bookkeeping. "I've been requesting actual invoices for 6 months, David explained when we met at the local coffee shop, the aroma of roasted beans mixing with honest conversation. "Linda claims everything's proprietary information, but I've identified $67,000 in questionable expenses in this year's budget alone." David's spreadsheets revealed a pattern of financial irregularities that would make any auditor's pulse race. Landscaping bills that didn't correspond to actual work performed, equipment purchases with no delivery documentation, legal fees for services completely unrelated to HOA business. Our third ally was Rebecca Martinez, a civil engineer who'd originally designed the subdivision's stormwater management system before Linda modified the specifications without proper permits. Rebecca possessed that practical intelligence of someone who designs infrastructure that must function in the real world. "Linda changed my drainage calculations to reduce costs," Rebecca explained during our strategy session at my kitchen table. Now her modifications direct runoff straight toward protected wetlands. The violations could trigger a federal investigation if the EPA gets involved. Rebecca brought technical expertise and professional credibility, exactly what we'd need to counter Linda's emotional manipulation tactics. Friday evening, we conducted our final strategy session around my dining room table. Catherine had prepared 4 binders of evidence, each organized for maximum courtroom impact. The plan was surgical: expose Linda's financial fraud, reveal the zoning time bomb, and present my membership application as the solution to both crises. David would handle the financial presentation using clear charts that any homeowner could understand. $38,000 to Mike's landscaping company for work valued at $16,000, $22,000 for pool maintenance that was actually performed weekly instead of the contracted daily service, legal fees that included Linda's personal divorce attorney paid with community funds. Sandra would read testimonials from harassed residents, demonstrating the human cost of Linda's power addiction. Rebecca would explain the infrastructure violations and environmental risks that Linda had concealed from the community. During my planning director tenure, I'd learned that people respond to narratives more than statistics. We needed residents to see Linda as the root problem, not merely a symptom of poor governance. Every violation, every fine, every harassment campaign was part of a systematic pattern designed to consolidate power and extract money from the community. Catherine reviewed the legal procedures we'd need to follow. Georgia HOA law stipulated that emergency board elections could be initiated by any member presenting evidence of financial mismanagement. My membership application would provide standing to make such a motion, and my 28% voting share would make it impossible for Linda's supporters to obstruct. The backup plan was equally crucial. If Linda attempted to end the meeting prematurely, Catherine would cite specific bylaw requirements for addressing member concerns. If Linda claimed I couldn't speak as a non-member, my application granted immediate standing. If she called police, all our documentation was legally obtained and we'd be on public property. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that makes everything seem possible. We assembled at my house at 7:30 a.m., 2 hours before the scheduled HOA meeting. The scent of bacon and coffee mixed with nervous energy as we reviewed our final preparations. Sandra was apprehensive but determined. Someone has to stop her before she completely destroys this community. David was excited about finally exposing the financial fraud. Numbers don't lie, and Linda's numbers have been lying for 2 years. Rebecca brought maps and technical drawings that would make Linda's infrastructure violations impossible to ignore. When residents see how much money she's wasted on shortcuts, they'll understand why their fees keep increasing. I felt calmer than I had in months. After years of defensive responses to Linda's attacks, we were finally going on offense with overwhelming evidence and legal authority. Catherine distributed copies of all our documents and reminded everyone about Linda's probable tactics. Expect personal attacks, false accusations, and emotional manipulation. The key is staying focused on facts and letting Linda's behavior demonstrate her character. At 10 a.m., we loaded our evidence into David's SUV and drove to the community center. The taste of anticipation was sweet, mixed with satisfaction from knowing we'd completed our research thoroughly. Linda's reign of suburban terror was about to end, and justice would be served with proper financial documentation and community solidarity. The only question was whether Linda would surrender gracefully or drag the entire subdivision through one final humiliating display of narcissistic fury. Based on her track record, I was betting on the spectacular meltdown. The moment of truth arrived like a freight train loaded with evidence and righteous indignation. 63 residents packed into the community center, creating an electric atmosphere that smelled like determination mixed with the lingering aroma of coffee from the snack bar. Local news photographer Mike Torres positioned himself discreetly near the back, having received a tip about the unfolding HOA investigation. County Prosecutor Janet Williams sat in the rear with Detective Brooks, ready to execute an arrest warrant as soon as Linda incriminated herself on record. Sheriff's Deputy Chen stationed himself outside, familiar with Linda's history of volatile behavior when cornered. Linda arrived wearing expensive new jewelry that had obviously been purchased with HOA funds. Her expression displayed the kind of desperate confidence you see in multi-level marketing recruiters just before their pyramid collapses. Her brother-in-law Mike was notably absent. Apparently, he'd already relocated to Tennessee with their liquid assets. She attempted to control the meeting from the opening gavel, limiting discussion topics and claiming security concerns required an abbreviated agenda. But when I requested recognition under parliamentary procedure, Catherine stood up with our completed membership documentation. The review period expired yesterday, Catherine announced clearly for everyone to hear. Mr. Davidson is now an official HOA member with 28% voting authority. Linda's face went pale as the power dynamic shifted permanently in front of her entire audience. The room buzzed with excitement as residents realized Linda no longer controlled their community's destiny. I approached the podium carrying 4 binders of evidence, my voice calm and professional from 18 years of municipal meetings. I'd like to present some financial irregularities for board review. Linda jumped up, screaming, "You can't discuss confidential HOA business." I looked directly at the news photographer. "Ma'am, embezzlement isn't confidential, it's criminal." The taste of justice was finally within reach, and Linda's reign of suburban tyranny was about to end in spectacular fashion. All I had to do was present the evidence and let the facts speak for themselves. David Martinez stepped up to the projection screen, his accountant's precision cutting through Linda's years of financial deception like a laser beam through fog. The first slide displayed her brother-in-law's landscaping contract. Billed $38,000, actual work value $16,000. This represents systematic billing fraud, David explained to the stunned audience. Pool maintenance charged for daily service, actual visits documented weekly. Legal fees include payments to Mrs. Blackwood's personal divorce attorney using community funds. Linda launched herself at David's laptop like an enraged wildcat, screaming that the numbers were fabricated lies. Her desperate attempt to shut down the presentation only made her appear more guilty as bank records showed financial transfers from HOA accounts directly to her personal checking. Several residents gasped audibly when the environmental violation documentation appeared on screen. $75,000 per house in potential EPA fines for wetland construction violations. 5 houses built in protected buffer zones without proper permits. Her social media posts from last month showed her celebrating at a luxury spa weekend, while homeowners thought their money was paying for infrastructure maintenance. That's when my background investigation really delivered the knockout punch. I continued, advancing to slides showing Linda's criminal history across multiple states. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Linda Blackwood Patterson, serial neighborhood destroyer. The room erupted in shocked whispers as her true identity was revealed. 4 previous communities devastated by identical schemes. Criminal charges pending in Connecticut for grand theft and financial fraud. Civil judgment in Arizona for $156,000 in restitution, still unpaid. Linda's complete psychological breakdown began in earnest. She screamed that everything was lies and conspiracy theories while her remaining supporters quietly moved toward the exits. When she lunged for the microphone, her voice cracked with desperation. "This man is dangerous. He threatened to contaminate our water supply. He's been photographing children." The accusations became increasingly wild and obviously fabricated. She pulled out a clearly forged psychiatric evaluation with the wrong doctor's license number and an expiration date from 2019. The document was so obviously fake that several residents actually laughed out loud. That's when County Prosecutor Williams stood up, her badge reflecting under the fluorescent lights. "Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Prosecutor Williams. You're under arrest for embezzling $89,000 from your neighbors." The photographer moved closer as Linda realized she'd been recorded committing perjury and making false accusations in front of witnesses. Her face cycled through colors that would have impressed a rainbow. "This is illegal entrapment," she shrieked, lunging at the photographer. "You can't record me without permission." The sound of her designer heels slipping on the polished floor as she stumbled was almost comedic if the situation weren't so serious. Detective Brooks approached with handcuffs, reading Miranda rights while Linda screamed about conspiracies and illegal persecution. The charges were read clearly for everyone present: embezzlement, fraud, filing false police reports, and witness intimidation. Each count carried serious prison time, and the evidence was overwhelming. As Linda was led away in handcuffs, still shrieking threats at everyone in sight, the community center fell into stunned silence. Her luxury Lexus was immediately impounded, revealing stolen HOA property including a commercial-grade pressure washer and landscaping equipment worth thousands of dollars. After the police cars disappeared into the night, I addressed the shell-shocked residents who remained. "I never wanted to destroy this community," I said, my voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "I wanted to save it." The applause started slowly with Sandra Chen, then spread like wildfire through the audience. People were crying, embracing, and finally expressing years of suppressed frustration and relief. I proposed an immediate emergency vote to remove Linda from all HOA positions, which passed unanimously since her proxy votes were now legally invalid. A temporary board was elected on the spot, David as treasurer, Sandra as secretary, and Rebecca Martinez as president. When someone asked if I wanted a board position, I declined with a smile. I'd prefer to serve as an advisor. My memorial garden is always open for community events, and I think it's time we started actually being neighbors instead of combatants. The meeting ended with something I hadn't witnessed in 2 years: neighbors talking to each other like human beings instead of adversaries in a property value war. The taste of victory was sweet, but the real satisfaction came from watching a community begin to heal itself after years of authoritarian abuse. Linda's reign of suburban terror was over, and democracy had won with documentation, evidence, and one very expensive luxury car full of stolen property. Justice served with proper financial accounting and genuine community solidarity. 8 months later, I'm sitting in Sarah's memorial garden watching neighborhood children learn about native plants while their parents actually collaborate on community projects instead of fighting about architectural violations. The fragrance of blooming jasmine from our first annual Memorial Garden Festival drifts across the property, mixing with the honeysuckle scent and sound of genuine laughter, something this community hadn't experienced in years. Linda received 6 years in state prison after pleading guilty to avoid trial. The asset forfeiture process recovered most of the stolen funds, including her precious spa membership that was seized faster than you could say emergency landscaping expenses. Her brother-in-law Mike was extradited from Tennessee and received 2 years for conspiracy, while fake Inspector Tommy got community service and a permanent ban from any government-related work. The new HOA board implemented what we called the Transparency Initiative. All financial records posted online monthly, competitive bidding required for any contract exceeding $2,000, and quarterly community forums replaced Linda's secretive board meetings. We eliminated every one of her oppressive regulations, transforming the community covenant from a weapon of harassment into actual guidelines for neighborly cooperation. The zoning crisis that could have destroyed 32 homes was resolved through genuine community collaboration. I used my planning connections to help navigate the variance renewal process, working with county commissioners to create a sustainable development plan that protected both environmental resources and property values. The community now has permanent legal status, and the problematic houses were remediated at the developer's expense to meet environmental standards. My memorial garden became the heart of our healing community. Sarah's Sanctuary, named after my late wife, now hosts educational programs for neighborhood children, community tool sharing, and peaceful evening gatherings for anyone who needs therapeutic space as much as I did. The stone bench I carved in 2019 has been expanded to accommodate the whole neighborhood, and the sound of children learning about butterflies and native plants would have made Sarah incredibly happy. The ripple effect extended far beyond our suburban subdivision. Jennifer Walsh's investigative series earned a state journalism award, and the story went viral with the headline, "How One Widower Saved His Community from HOA Dictator." I ended up testifying before the state legislature about HOA accountability reform, helping draft what became known as Linda's Law, legislation requiring annual independent financial audits and transparent reporting for all homeowner associations. 5 other local communities requested my assistance with their own corrupt boards, and I discovered a purpose I never anticipated. There's something deeply rewarding about using 18 years of planning experience to help neighbors reclaim their communities from petty dictators who think property ownership grants feudal authority. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Between asset seizure, insurance claims, and recovered stolen equipment, we actually ended up with larger reserves than before Linda's crime spree. Monthly assessments dropped to $195, lower than when Linda first seized power, and our emergency fund is healthier than ever. Property values increased 15% after Linda's removal, proving that honest governance and community cooperation are better for real estate markets than authoritarian rule and constant litigation. Who would have imagined that treating neighbors like human beings actually makes neighborhoods more desirable? Personally, the memorial garden that helped me process grief after Sarah's death has become something even more meaningful, a symbol of community healing and shared purpose. Sorrow over my wife's loss will always be part of me, but channeling that pain into helping others has given my life renewed meaning. Last week, I received a call from a desperate homeowner in Florida. Another HOA corruption story involving a disabled veteran whose accessibility modifications were being blocked by a power-hungry board president. "Sir, I heard about what you accomplished in Georgia," the voice said, trembling with frustration and hope. "My HOA is trying to fine me for installing wheelchair accessibility ramps." I looked out at my memorial garden where Sandra Chen was teaching her grandson about native butterflies while David Park grilled vegetables for our monthly community potluck. The sound of neighbors genuinely enjoying each other's company filled the evening air like therapeutic music. "Tell me everything," I said, already reaching for my notebook. "Let's see what we can accomplish together." Because here's what I learned from this entire experience. Petty tyrants only succeed when good people remain silent. But when neighbors unite with proper documentation, legal knowledge, and the courage to fight back, justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable. The best response to corrupt authority isn't more corruption, it's building something better together. If you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of these tales are absolutely incredible. Trust me, Linda wasn't even the worst I've encountered. And hey, if this story inspired you to think differently about standing up to petty tyrants in your own life, smash that subscribe button because there are more community justice stories coming your way. Next week's episode involves an HOA president who attempted to steal a veteran service dog. You absolutely will not believe how that situation resolves. Sometimes the good guys really do win, especially when they bring receipts, proper legal representation, and the unshakable conviction that neighbors deserve better than living under the control of narcissistic bullies. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some memorial roses to tend and a community to enjoy. Share your thoughts in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for more outrageous neighborhood showdowns coming soon.